Other countries have an army, but in the case of Pakistan, the army has a country. 9 out of 10 times, if somebody has tried to fight a two-front, he has lost.
हम सड़क बना देंगे तो China will use it.
So those were the thought processes. Events of 24, change of government in Bangladesh is most worrisome. The terrain favors China because on their side the mobilization is over the Tibetan plateau. Our T-72 tanks now, they've been there since 1980s. Our Cheetah Chetak helicopters, nobody flies Cheetah Chetaks. China keeps saying, don't forget 62, don't forget 62. We also keep telling them that we are not 62. We are 2022.
यानी उस पीरियड में चीन बदल गया.
My journey is not only my journey. So it is a murder mystery set in an army cantonment.
Okay.
In an army background.
Close to something which happened in real life?
No, totally fiction.
Totally fiction.
So there is no question of any permission.
Hello and welcome. And today's context, Sat Sri Akal. I'll come later why I'm saying that. You're with Jist. I am Rahul Shrivastava. The Art of War, penned by Sun Tzu, a Chinese military general and strategist, sometime in 500 BC, is a timeless classic on military treatise and warfare. Napoleon, Mao Zedong, General MacArthur, they seem to have picked up from his wisdom. Now, in his book, The Art of War, he says that art of war is of vital importance to the state. The general is the bulwark of the state, and that the skillful leader of an army, a general, subdues the enemy troops without really fighting. Now, Sun Tzu, lots of water has flown down the river since his times. The nature and character of war has changed. But what it seems hasn't changed, the nature and character of a general. Today, I have the pleasure of having with me on our show one such general, a distinguished soldier of a very proud army, which possesses not just valor, talent, but also what Sun Tzu had said, a deep moral law. Welcome to our show, General Manoj Mukund Naravane, the 28th General of the Indian Army, who was in office for 28 months, as once he famously said, after taking charge from General Bipin Rawat on 31st December 2019. Should I, General Saab, greet you with a Sat Sri Akal?
Sat Sri Akal.
Because that's been your chant for 42 odd years?
Yes. Firstly, thanks Rahul for having me on your show, and a very happy new year to you and all your viewers.
A new year to you, sir.
And glad to be here.
You know, I would like to start on a slightly naughty note, which I was discussing with him earlier, that, the generals on the other side of the western hostile frontier are known to living in some extremely posh circumstances in large villas, not Indian generals.
Yeah, it's very coincidental that you mentioned that. I've been here for about a year now. And when I shifted here, it was just before Diwali. And I was standing in the balcony and the whole colony
Living
was...
in an apartment.
In an apartment, yeah. We're in DLF Ultima.
Yeah.
And I just stood in the balcony and I took a photo. And I posted it online, that first Diwali in my, the new flat. And that photo went viral. Within no time, it had 1 lakh views, and with all these comments.
Must have caused a lot of anguish in Pakistan, especially.
And yes, and
because they must have wondered.
And it was picked up on the other side of the border also, and it was the Pakistani citizens or common man who commented on this aspect
In amazement.
that look at that Indian Army general living in such modest circumstances,
But why does it happen?
and
Why doesn't it happen in India like
and
what
our
happens in
generals
Pakistan?
are having mansions in London
Yes.
and
Abroad, yes, and amassing wealth.
it happens because, as they famously say, that other countries have an army, but in the case of Pakistan, the army has a country. So obviously,
So you, sir, began your career with the 7th Sikh Light Infantry in June 1980. You served for almost 42 years and retired on 30th April 2022. What do generals do 30 odd months after retiring? What does Chief of Army Staff do?
well, many people have asked me, that how did you make the transition from active service to retired life? But especially in the army, the exact day and time you're going to retire.
Yes.
So you have adequate time to prepare for that transition. It doesn't come as a surprise. It's not that you've been given a pink slip one fine day. So if you have prepared yourself, this transition is not really a matter of any angst or anything.
What do you miss the most?
And it's something to look forward to. You've not only
Retirement to look forward to?
Yes, not only 42 years in the army, but 4 years training before that.
Yes.
So it's 46 years in uniform, living by the clock all the time. Every moment is regulated, every hour, every second. So it's good to be on your own, to be able to do
On call also.
and not be on call all the time. So it's something definitely to look forward to.
What do you miss most?
But it's not as if you're not busy. And it's up to, but now the difference is that it is up to you to decide how busy you want to be. As you said,
It's
you're
not the pulls and pressure of thousands of kilometers of borders or domestic distress.
And having to visit so many units all the time, traveling.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. So I was asking you, what do you miss the most now?
I think what you miss the most is the camaraderie.
Oh.
And when you're in a military station, the camaraderie, even if you go out for a walk, everyone says, "Good evening, uncle." You're with a wife, "Good evening, auntie." Whether you know that person or not, it is part of our military culture. So once you get out, you do find that difference between the military ethos and what is there in Civvy Street.
You were there for 28 odd months in the Chief of Army Staff chair, sitting in a chair that you have to thwart 2 nuke armed enemies on 2 flanks, and also not so very friendlies on the other sides. How does it feel to be there? This is for young boys and girls who might be aspiring to. Now I very happily say young boys and girls who might be aspiring to join the army. That at the peak of a career, when you become a general, how big is the transition from being a soldier to a general?
Well, when you join the army, you never think you're going to become a general. It's not even in your wildest of dreams. You're there when you join the academy as a first termer. Your aim is to become a second termer. Nothing more than that. You're not looking even 6 months beyond. So it's just something which happens. You keep doing your duty, and if luck favors you, you go up the ladder, and ultimately it takes you somewhere or the other. In my case, to the highest office that the army has to offer. But in that, I would also like to say that not everybody can become chief. But
we have how many lieutenant generals? 90?
We are authorized 91 lieutenant generals. Yes. But and only 1 out of that. So the pyramid is very steep.
Yes.
So in that context, if somebody is not able to go up that pyramid, it does not mean that he is not good. He's equally competent, but it's just that those vacancies are not there. So, luck does play a...
So that transition, does
does play a part.
Does the 3-star level prepare you for the 4 stars? Or,
Yes,
or it's a totally different ballgame being a 4-star general?
No, every rank prepares you for the next rank. That is the structured training that we have in the army, which in the army, when I say army, I mean the armed forces, Army, Navy, Air Force. So we have this structured training which is always preparing you for the next rank. So as a company commander or as a young officer, you have the junior command course, which is preparing you to become a company commander. You have a senior command course, which is preparing you to be a CO, a colonel, and similarly. So that training is a continuous process, preparing you for the next rank and the next appointment. But the next appointment per se will always be a new ball game. So you have to fit in and learn that new job. And that is where the skill lies, in able to adjust to those new responsibilities as fast as possible.
So first day when you entered the general's office, COAS office, what is it like? Did you think of your first day in the forge on that day when you were sitting on the chair for the first time?
Yeah, in fact, out of all the people who had come to wish me, I had made it a point to call my first commanding officer.
Oh. To your taking over charge?
To my taking over charge.
Oh.
And of course, he was not only pleasantly surprised, but he was very touched that 42 years later I've reached out to him. That time, Lieutenant Colonel Madan Das, he retired as a brigadier. Okay. So he was present there. So my journey is not only my journey. My journey is all those who have been associated with and companions, all my seniors who have guided me, who have mentored me. It's not that all were good. Some would have been not as good. But you're a sum total of all your experiences, and it is for you to draw out the good and discard the bad. So I think I was able to do that, and of course, my first CO had a major role to play in putting me on the right track.
On the track. Now, you see, you don't seem to be one of those who will fade into the background easily. I would like to tell the viewers that General Naravane's military acumen is complemented with very strong academic credentials. He has a master's degree in defense studies, an MPhil degree in defense, and I would like to tell you that after retirement, General Naravane completed PhD in defense and strategic studies from Punjab University, Patiala.
That's right.
That's very rare to hear that people, after retiring from the stratosphere of government hierarchy, eventually going in for a degree.
You see, there's a history to that.
Mm-hmm.
When I was posted at Ambala as a co-commander, one of the divisions is in Patiala, so we used to visit Patiala very often. And Punjabi University, Patiala, had a very good rapport with that division. So in one of those interactions, the professors there said that, why don't you enroll for a PhD? So that is how this whole thing happened. So I had enrolled way back in 2016. And not only did I enroll, I gave the entrance exam.
Oh.
Yes, I gave the entrance exam as a Lieutenant General, sitting amongst all 30-year-olds.
Really?
Yes.
And so how was that experience?
So it was...
a Lieutenant General, the stars and the...
Yeah, but I went through the whole procedure. So there was no, bhai-bandi.
The examiners were not standing at attention.
So...
You didn't tell them to stand at ease.
So, of course, the professors were very kind.
One very interesting thing, viewers, about General Naravane is that it's a quirk of fate in life. In a family, father was in the army but had to join the Air Force. The son wanted to be in Air Force but landed up in the army. Will you tell us that story?
That's how fate works. Your future sometimes lies on the path not taken. So my father was originally an army cadet, He was in the IMA, but unfortunately he got injured during training and
Hurt his knee.
Fractured his knee. And those days, things were not medical, things were not so good. So he was withdrawn on medical grounds. And thereafter he did his graduation and joined the Air Force.
And
you? I would have liked to join the Air Force, but in my final year in school, my eyesight became poor. So Air Force, you need 6/6 eyesight right at the time of joining. So perforce I had to become an Army cadet.
So Air Force's loss was Army's gain.
Yes, in a way.
I want to take you back now that we are talking about your start and your days in Nagaland. I want to take you back to a young officer in Sikkim where you had the first encounter with the Chinese. Can you recount what was that incident?
No, I didn't have an encounter as
Not
such.
encounter means...
But that was my first posting.
Posting, yes.
And our battalion was...
First-hand experience with the Chinese.
First-hand, yes. So we had... my battalion was posted at that time next to Nathula and Nathula Pass. In fact, we were to de-induct, so we had actually handed over. But since that process was going on, I didn't go up and to the pass and saw the preparations on the other side, their fortifications, how they are manning various things. But in those days, things were still quite tense. So you still had to be inside the bunker. You couldn't come out and stand and wave to each other. It was 1980 was still the period when there were, still there were a lot of tensions with the PLA.
It was your first field posting?
That was my first field posting, immediately after commissioning.
Okay. And so you landed up at Nathula?
At Nathula, yeah. The battalion was in Gangtok, but one of our posts was up forward at Nakchok.
So the first day you drove up to the bunkers where all your colleagues were, and you were told how far were the Chinese?
Yeah, they were just across the fence. So our bunkers on this side and theirs on the other. It was quite exciting, because that's what you joined the army for. So it was quite exciting to go up there and see what you had read in theory, that this is how defenses are sited.
The theatre is all about.
And and to see it actually there, the bunkers.
What is it like?
The barbed wire, the minefields, all that theory that you have seen is happening right in front.
The other thing which you haven't talked much about, and I haven't heard you much talking about, is you were part of the Indian peacekeeping force in Sri Lanka. Rajiv Gandhi sent the IPKF in 1987 to fight Sri Lanka's civil war. Bruised and battered, the IPKF was called back in 1990. You were young in your 20s. How was Sri Lanka?
In fact, ours, that is 7 Sikhalai, was the last unit to come back.
Yes.
March 1990. And the cover of the India Today, all those photos of the Sikhs, is my unit, 7 Sikhalai.
Really?
Yeah.
Means you took those pictures or?
No, somebody took those pictures, but ours was the last unit to come.
So your picture was on the India Today cover in 1990?
My units.
Units, yeah.
Units. My units picture, yes.
Okay. So how was Sri Lanka at that time? Because if historians, the way they recount, the university attack was a huge mess.
Yeah.
And a lot of people were lost.
So actually, when we went there, we went as a peacekeeping force.
Yeah.
And it's not under UN mandate or auspicious. It was a bilateral agreement that we would go there. And the idea was to keep the Sri Lankan army and the LTT and other smaller groups apart. We were supposed to, interpose ourselves in between, keep them apart.
Create a buffer.
And then the other political activities were to start, the provincial elections and so on and so forth. But somewhere along the way, I wouldn't say somewhere along the way, quite soon after the IPKF had inducted, my unit was not there at that time. We went about
a little
later. Some of the LTT cadres had been apprehended by the Sri Lankan army and taken. And over that, some misunderstandings arose that we are not doing enough to protect
The IPK,
the LTT, and that we are more inclined towards
The Sri
Sri
Lankans.
Lanka and Sri Lankan army. So then that mistrust happened, and overnight, friends became foes.
Okay.
And then, of course, since we had gone as a, when you go as a peacekeeping force, your outlook, your deployments are all different from when you're, in a peace enforcement role or when you're, expected to fight. So obviously, the early months, the units which had gone there did suffer reverses, but we got our act together quite fast. And by the time our unit went, we were all prepared that we are not going for a jaunt.
It was not it was not a UN peacekeeping force kind of an assignment.
Thing. We knew we are going into active operations.
So that was the one first hostile action you saw?
87. No, before that, there were some smaller actions in other CI type of
but that was
environment.
You see, today when you sit back, we are in 2025 and we talk about period between 87 to 1990. Will you say that it was not our war?
See, whenever you go into any action, you must know what is the aim that is to be achieved, number one, and finally, what is your exit strategy. I think at that point of time, neither of these had been factored in. And we went in more actually to assuage the domestic Tamil sentiment in India, because the Tamils in Sri Lanka were suffering. Then we did that humanitarian airdrop, which itself was actually a violation because we had not taken the permission from Sri Lanka. So that itself was sort of show of force. So we went in as saviors to the local Tamil population, and that's why it was more as a peacekeeping force. But we possibly had not thought it through completely, that what could happen if we have gone as a peacekeeping force, how long are we going to be there? What would be the circumstances? What are the things which could go wrong? And should that happen, what is the backup plan? So I think a little bit of the higher direction of war, which is the political guidance, that was possibly lacking. It was more as a immediate emotional response that let's do something without really knowing.
But of course, political also.
And political, yes. Let's do something at a political level.
You see, is that kind of a decision that a general sitting in Raksha Bhavan or sitting at the army headquarters needs to tell the political bosses that no? Was it a misadventure which should not be repeated in future?
Well, it's very easy to second guess later on.
Okay.
But that was probably the first time that we were encountering something like that. And as I said, as a peacekeeping mission, and India had experience in UN peacekeeping missions, so it's not that we were not...
or we were hunting glory for like 1970?
No, not in that sense, but we did think that we are going there as a very humanitarian force to prevent further bloodshed and, between the majority Sinhala population and the minority Tamil population. So we did actually think that we are going as saviors and as a humanitarian force, but things just went out of hand.
But it eventually will say that it was politically miscalculated because it did cost us a prime minister.
Ultimately,
you see,
yes.
The cost of IPKF movement in Sri Lanka, we paid with a prime minister.
But it's not that we could not fulfill our mandate, because by the time, by mid-89, we had the LTT on the run.
Yes.
And that is when the LTT played a very smart card. They went to the Sri Lankan and said, this is our internal matter.
Why should you have them?
Why are we having them? We'll sort it out amongst ourselves. So the Sri Lankan army and the LTT got into a sort of detente and ceasefire, and we were fighting the LTT without the Sri Lankan army being involved. So that is the amount of pressure the LTT was under. And those 4-5 months, we were still actively engaged in ops. They didn't do anything to any Sri Lankan post.
It was all targeted in India.
Only targeted towards India, but they were really under pressure. And moment we withdrew, they rescinded their agreement and started fighting the Sri Lankan army again. So it was a very.
It was a very. I think
a very.
I've not seen a tragic kinship, a tragic comic kinship.
Comic, yes. Had we stayed for another 6 odd months, we would have actually possibly won the military part of it. But while we were there, provincial elections were held. It's not that they were not held. And EPRLF, that was the party that time.
Then I would like to tell
to power.
I'm sorry. Then I'd like to tell the viewers that, very rare that a chief of army staff gets a baptism in his chair like the one that Dr. General Naravane got. Because not only he had the usual bread and butter jagras to handle China, of course, but then his term started with something coincided with something called the COVID pandemic.
Yeah.
So you had COVID and China, those two big flashpoints of your term. How do you manage? Because you were managing Operation Namaste. Because that's one story which has not been talked about, what the army did during COVID.
We had been monitoring the news and the situation worldwide. So it's not that it took us totally by surprise. Of course, the magnitude did surprise everybody. But we knew that something like this is happening. In fact, I was to visit Israel in February. The Israeli defense minister got COVID.
Yes.
And obviously the army chief would have met him. So there's no point my going if I can't meet the Israeli army chief. So my visit was cancelled. So that was the first inkling we had of how COVID is going to affect us. And during those early days, there were also news items that people have stopped shaking hands and instead worldwide they're doing namaste to each other. So from that we got the idea that let's call our protective measures that we are taking as of namaste, and the moment some operational kind of thing is done, then no matter whether it is a health issue or whatever, then the coordination agency automatically becomes the military operations.
Okay.
So although this is a health issue which would have been for the adjutants general and the medical branch to deal, but for purposes of reporting, monitoring, it went under the MO director.
Okay.
We had put in our protective measures in place.
11 lakh people.
11 lakh people. So we had already started doing this curtailing leave, unnecessary movements.
Okay.
So much before the main lockdown happened, we
were insulating.
We had already started insulating. And even when the lockdown happened, my greater fear was that should the internal security situation or the aid to civil authority demands, because the army is the second line. Yes. Suppose we have to man the electric substations, or we have to man trains or waterways, then our manpower needs to be safe. Otherwise, who will come to the rescue of our own citizens?
Okay, you were that line of defense, final line of
final
defense.
Line, yes.
When it comes to crisis, that if people are hit.
Yes, if people are hit, our medical resources.
How will the infrastructure be manned?
So I was looking at force protection more from the point of view of being able to help our own citizens and our own requirements should the need arise, which did not. But in view of what unfolded later with the Chinese, this force protection measures that we had put in place stood us in good stead because we were ready.
Really?
Ready in the sense we were not so badly affected.
Okay.
My forces, my men were still battle ready. It is not that whole garrisons were down with COVID.
Okay.
We had our
So if you were saying that if you had not been the early bird in insulating, you could have had a situation
where we are
that
also
India might not have been prepared for the Chinese.
yes. So it could have happened that many more of our people would have been, out of circulation and not be able to, be deployed overnight to the front lines. So it helped us in an indirect manner. Just
Blessing.
as a blessing, as a luck. Yeah.
China. That was how did it start? 2020 May.
Yeah.
Or it was happening before that also. In fact.
No, you see, the small skirmishes, not even skirmishes, it's even below the level of skirmish, these small face-offs between patrols of either side is something which is a regular year-round feature, and not just in Ladakh, but at all the friction points, all the disputed areas, sensitive areas, right from Ladakh to Arunachal. And whenever patrols come face to face, there were protocols and confidence building measures in place to ensure that it doesn't rise beyond a face off and escalate and beyond little bit of pushing and shoving to show that this is my place. So these incidents were happening. Only thing is the frequency and the intensity of these kept increasing in certain areas. Not that it happened.
Which area was the most intense, steep rise?
So in eastern Ladakh, of course, but there were also places in Sikkim, in Arunachal, where similar level of aggression and fisticuffs resulting in minor injuries to others. So there's at least 3-4 such areas all over the border. It is just that in the area of eastern Ladakh, in Pangong and later on in Galwan, that it really flared up, resulting in casualties on either side.
Will you say that China has been what you popularly have said, and it's an part of army, this thing, salami cutting for a long time?
Yes, so this salami slicing strategy they have been using, but it's not that they've really encroached into a territory, that is their attempt. So their attempt is that you come forward couple of steps, see if there is any reaction to it. If there's no reaction, that becomes the new normal. So moment the slightest hint of something like that, you have to oppose them, you have to push them back, you have to say you cannot come here. So that is where that face-offs and that pushing, shoving happen, that no, you cannot come beyond this point.
How much they had aggressed in Pangong? What had changed for you as a chief of army staff to sit up and take note?
See, this whole issue of the boundary is a question of perception. It is not demarcated. Nobody really knows and where the boundary lies. So we believe the boundary to be up to a certain place. They believe it to be up to a certain place. So we go up to our perception of the line. They want to come to their perception of the line. So obviously there's friction. So that is where it actually the whole difference lies. It started from the north bank of Pangong, where they came in much larger strength, violating all the protocols in place. Because the protocol says that patrols will not exceed 15 or 20 people. So you can't suddenly come with 1,000.
Okay, they did.
So if you suddenly come in that strength, then obviously your 15, 20 don't stand the strength and you will get pushed back. So that is what they were trying to do. Enforce or patrol up to their perception, but denies the opportunity to go up to our perceived line. So this was the game that they were trying to play, which we resisted. And because we resisted, things, the temperatures kept rising.
I've heard your interviews and I've heard you telling that the transgressions were at a surprising thing about was that they used to arrive with maces and clubs with barbed wires on them.
Yes, so it was again, the protocols which are laid down, especially to deal with face-offs, is firstly that you will stay away from each other. Only two people will come forward from either side. That is the commander and one interpreter, who will talk and go back.
The buddy.
You're not supposed to fire, open fire. There will be no violence. Nowhere does it say you can come with sticks and maces and wrapped with barbed wire or anything. So they were selectively following the
agreements, and
protocols, those provisions which suited them. But every time they would say, but you can't fire. Their expectation was that we will abide by the protocol and we will not open fire. And they were taking advantage of that the protocol says no opening fire, to come in such large numbers, which is actually very non-tactical. If you open fire on a crowd of 1,000 people, there will be a massacre. They were banking on that fact that we will observe or adhere to the protocol, while they were violating. So they were observing them as it suited them.
So it was basically overwhelm and intimidate.
Intimidate, yes, by sheer
numbers and those
by numbers and of those.
A fig leaf of sticking to the protocol, no firearms.
But no fire. But although we are carrying firearms, there were some reports that people were not carrying firearms, and that was all rubbish. Everybody was carrying arms.
It was said, there were reports that soldiers who were...
No, they were at all times, everybody goes prepared to take on whatever might come. So everybody is carrying their arms and ammunition. But the protocol was, try to avoid or don't open fire. And because of that, they were taking advantage and being able, by sheer force of numbers, to keep us at bay. But the moment they realized later on that that Lakshman Rekha has been crossed, and when we did open fire on one or two occasions, then automatically this kind of tactics that they were following stopped.
What happened at PP-15, Galwan Valley? What happened?
That was, as I said, this in the heat of the moment when these face-offs are happening, one thing leads to another, and that escalation.
What is the genesis? There was a patrol.
Again, it is one of those disputed areas where there are differences of where the boundary line should be. So again, this blocking action by either side. So in the bargain of this blocking action, things went out of hand. And obviously, again, the numbers on their side were more favorable, and therefore they were able to inflict about 20 casualties on us, though we also have given back in good measure, although the Chinese are not willing to disclose any figures. They've only agreed to 4. But the numbers are not important, and I don't want to get into the numbers game either. That what is important is they suffered casualties, and that made them realize that this game of theirs is not going to work anymore. The salami slicing, that you inch forward at no cost. They realize that everything will have to pay a cost. And this is the first casualties they've suffered in a long, long time. For over 20 years, they had not suffered.
I have my notes is Colonel Santosh Babu, martyred on 15 June 2020. First Indian Armed Force commissioned officer since 1967. And among the first Indian soldiers to have been killed in action against the Chinese People's Liberation Army since 1975.
Right. Yeah. So that is the impunity with which they were acting, that nothing is going to happen to them. But when things happen, so whether it is 4 or 40 is immaterial. They realize that this strategy of theirs is not going to work anymore. So
The challenge we offered, that bodily challenge that
bodily
Indian
challenge,
forces
and that
ordered.
we are
But was that a directive from you
no,
or
that
from the
is
top?
no, that is what happened in the heat of the moment or the spot.
No, but is there a change of paradigm in thinking that no, we are not going to accept uh,
That
this?
that happened little later.
Okay.
That particular date at Galwan, that was a very localized action. But thereafter, of course, we took a very conscious decision that, and the counter action that we took, which resulted in both sides opening fire, but again in a very controlled manner. And yes, that thus far and no further.
So, post Galwan, it was a localized clash, as you say, but the tensions along the LAC rose. And end of August 2020, there was a particular incident where Chinese PLA moved tanks and troops.
So we had this North Bank thing had happened, and Galwan had happened. Both sides had moved in additional forces. We were in some talks had already started on how to withdraw from North Bank and PP 15, 16, 17, which had already happened beforehand. But the South Bank was still
Simmering.
dormant. There was nothing happening there. But we realized that some additional forces had been moved up, and overnight they were trying to do a similar action on the south bank of capturing the more dominating heights.
Really?
But obviously,
How far would that be from Leh or that region?
no, it's beyond one line of ranges, so no immediate danger. It's on the Spangur Gap.
Yeah.
So, but we were monitoring, and at night, perhaps close to midnight, the troops reported that some movement is taking place. So we immediately said that you also move. So actually, it was a race between both sides to who reaches the top first.
Really?
So in most of the places, we did manage to reach before the PLA. But there are an odd place on that main ridge line where they were also interposed in between. But majorly, we were on the...
So it was a situation in which there were two forces, two armies, trying to climb on top of ridges, and our soldiers beat them.
in the middle of the night. Because we were, by then we were also ready. And we knew that such kind of action could take place. So we had our counter plans in place. But then we did not stop at south bank of. Because we said now we have stopped there, and then the Spangur Gap, and then the Kailash ranges start. So he said if they can do it here, he can attempt a similar thing on the Kailash range also. Whereas garrison is just at the base of the range.
Yeah.
Whereas ours is still little
Further
away. He would have been able to move much faster
So you want to say that if they had succeeded there, it would have set a benchmark for other places.
for other places. So therefore, when this South Bank action started, we said let us not always be reactive. Let us take the initiative and move into the Kailash ranges first. And that took him totally by surprise. Because never had they imagined that the India or the Indian army will seize such an initiative or take such a proactive stance or action. Because it really took them by surprise.
When you say that, I want to first ask you that is it something which we didn't do it, Alam? The Chinese never thought we will do this. Is it because we never did it? We never thought like that.
No, we have done it in the past. It is not that in the Sumdorong Chu incident. That time also we had done such.
Traditionally, since 1962, is it that the Chinese got used to having India being a softer playmate as far as the LAC was concerned?
Yes, our responses were always slightly on the more muted side, except for these odd cases where it was that let's try to resolve it through talks. So, but that you will take such preemptive action, and that too when troops are mobilized and quite close to each other. So they were taken in the Kailash ranges. They were taken totally by surprise, and all the heights were occupied by us. And they were on that is when they moved those tanks that you were talking about.
Richingla Jhatka.
Rechingla, yeah. Rechingla, Rezangla, yeah.
Can you explain in detail that, what was your conversation with the defense minister then? What did he say? When a general COS goes to the defense minister and says...
It is not just with the Raksha Mantri. We have what is called the China Study Group, which has the foreign minister, the defense minister, the NSA, the secretaries to these ministries, the home secretary. So it is all, it's a whole of nation discussion and decision. It is not that army chief one fine day decides that I'm going
It is not unilateral.
Unilateral. It's part of a collective decision making process. And I think in this particular instance, we got it right. And we were able to
you found at that time as a chief of army staff, the defense minister and the infrastructure around him or the matrix around him, did you find him cooperative?
Oh yes, very much so.
Were they depending on you? Were they giving you a free hand? How was it then?
Yeah, very much so. As part of our deliberation, discussion, they understood that we need to take this preemptive action, and immediately the okay was given. In fact, even as the briefing was in progress, the orders were passed.
That was quick.
That is how quick. It was not the meeting got over and then you settled down, and it was immediate. So, and that is where every minute and hour counts, and before nightfall we were on top.
Okay. The firing incident.
Yeah, so
it was once in a very long time.
Yeah, so thereafter they again tried the same thing and coming in large.
Where was this?
Most of the places. North Bank also, South Bank also, Rechingla, Rezingla also. They kept trying to come in greater number. But this time we had very clearly told our troops that there is a red line, and that if your physical safety is at stake, you are free to open fire.
Even if they don't open?
Even if they don't open. Because you, again, against your post of 30 people, if they come with 300, they will overwhelm you by sheer numbers. Only way to stop is by firing. And we had given that discretion to the commander on the spot. But it is to the credit of the troops and the commanders that they did not take it as a free hand given that you open up.
Free for all.
Free for all. So and wherever fire was opened, it was opened very
restrained
in a restrained manner and under the supervision and directions of the company commander or the commanding officer, that fire 2 rounds or fire 3 rounds, fire in this place or that place, so that they realized that we will open fire if they come any further, and that kept them at bay.
So they were depending on India, the Chinese were depending on India, adhering to the protocol, while they kept tinkering with the protocol, basically to upset that status of the LAC.
Of the LAC, yeah.
That
was their game plan. But they did not, and subsequently whenever talks used to happen, flag meeting, they used to keep saying, don't open fire, don't open fire.
They were saying?
Yes, they were. Because they realized that, that Rubicon has been crossed and their tactics are no longer going to work. So we told them equally.
You mean to say the intimidator eventually
realized that it's not going to work anymore.
यानी उस पीरियड में चीन बदल गया. Negotiation table पे हम रोते थे.
So that tune did change because they realized that this tactic, and then we told them clearly that you follow the rules, we will follow the rules. But it can't be that you do what you want and then we are going to stick by this. So,
and in meetings they said, Goli ma chalana.
Yes, very much so.
That must have given a certain sense of confidence boost, because has it happened to China? It has got, I think, 17 odd disputes with its neighbors.
And this is precisely what they're doing in South China Sea. with a large flotilla of ships trying to block a Filipino ship. That is the same thing in the maritime domain. Again, they're banking on the fact that nobody will open fire. Nobody means the Philippine side will not open fire.
Or same the Taiwanese and
Or
others.
Taiwanese or others. In fact, in one of the interviews, one of the Philippine generals has said that the only difference between us and India is that India fought back.
That's credible.
Whereas in their case, they're still, getting pushed and shoved but they're also learning that enough is enough.
Do you think that incident where India changed its the method in which it took on the Chinese, that changed and perhaps set the tone for the future?
So, in fact, that incident, our willingness to take proactive action, our not willingness, but our stand that if need be and if physical safety is at stake, we will open fire. So all these things did impose a lot of caution on the PLA and the Chinese, and that is one of the reasons why the talks also happened, because talks cannot.
It brought them to the discussion
It
table.
brought them to the discussion because they realized that this unilateral attempts to unilaterally change the status quo through the use of force are not going to work any longer. So better sense did prevail finally, and that is why talks happened, finally leading on to the disengagement.
You went to the border post. How far away were you from the Chinese posts?
I went right up to Rezangla,
How far were the Chinese from you?
30 meters.
30 meters?
Yeah.
It means 200 odd feet. That close?
Means the tanks were standing 100 meters apart. I went and stood.
How did you decide that?
No, I went because we were at Rezangla, so I went to visit my troops at Rezangla, and the Chinese tanks were just.
नहीं जनरल साहब बहादुर आ रहे हैं मिलने.
No, that's part of our job to go and meet the people.
What was the
wherever
reaction of the
they are.
boys?
Oh, they were always happy. In fact, I went and had tea with them, went into the tents where they were staying. And let me tell you that the tents from inside were so warm I had to take off my coat.
Really?
Yes. So nice and cozy. That doesn't mean they were having a cushy time.
Yeah.
But
yeah, they were
well taken care of. So it was not 62. China keeps saying, don't forget 62, don't forget 62. We also keep telling them that we are not 62. We are 2022. You also don't forget. So our response, our capabilities, our infrastructure, our logistics chain, everything is different. We are much more advanced army than what we were in 62.
Has that kind of a perceptible change come in? Also, in this region, who has the geographical and strategic advantage? We or in China?
It's different in different parts
Because
of
a lot
the
of things have been said that the air bases are very high, where you can't have fighters operating very frequently because of lack of oxygen. A lot of things are said.
So, firstly, one is the army part of it, the land part of it, and one is the air part of it.
Yeah.
What you touched upon is the air part,
Yeah.
which is true because of the rarefied atmosphere. Your takeoff weight gets reduced drastically. In fact, sometimes because the temperature and weather condition, and IL-76 aircraft from Leh takes off without any passengers.
Yeah.
It's become so bad.
Yeah.
So yes, so that advantage we have. Although with now aerial refueling and things like that, I guess that advantage has got reduced. But definitely in most of the places, the terrain favors China because on their side, the mobilization is over the Tibetan plateau.
Okay. Yes.
Whereas in our case, our mobilization is over a number of mountain ranges with narrow roads and
difficult to maintain roads.
So definitely our mobilization takes much longer vis-a-vis the Chinese.
So are we looking at a permanent placement of a large number of troops for a long time?
No, that would be the next phase now. Now that the disengagement has started,
Which has taken 4 months.
4 years
since Galwan.
and since Galwan, and now that those legacy issues of Depsang and Demchok has also been resolved, so now is the time for moving to the next stage, which will be the de-escalation.
Can Chinese be trusted?
Yeah, so that is why it will be stage by stage. First was the disengagement from the friction point. Then de-escalation is that from these places you come back a certain agreed distance. Then once that phase is steady and stabilized, then you will come to the third phase of de-induction of those additional forces. Because stationing of additional forces, and I have made this point earlier also, it is not only that it is pinching us, it is pinching them equally.
Okay.
And I would say even more. Because
why?
Every force is maintained from a base. So my base for Leh Ladakh is Jammu and my hinterland, which is say 500 kilometers. His base for his troops stationed in Leh Ladakh is his eastern seaboard, because there is nothing in Tibet. Everything for sustenance of the force has to come 3,000 kilometers. I have to go only 500 kilometers. So who is at disadvantage? Actually, he is at a disadvantage. For him to maintain 50,000 troops is much more costly than for me to do it. For him, it must be 5 times costlier. So he is definitely
close to war.
He is also definitely feeling the pinch. It's not that he is not feeling the pinch.
It is not profitable to be there for a long time.
For a long time. So he is also feeling the pinch of maintaining and sustaining a force at those inhospitable areas, and possibly more. Is all the infrastructure and all which has to be made. Again, everything has to come from so far away. There's no local resources. So we have imposed costs on them, which people don't realize. People always think that we have been at the receiving end. Not at all. He has also been equally badly affected.
Because eventually at one level, you may be collective decision, it may be a lot of people, but eventually you are the one wearing the 4 stars.
And that's what you're paid for.
You're not paid that much, I think.
You see, everyone...
What was your thought process at that time?
Everyone in the chain of command...
Did you feel nervous? Did you feel... did you get too cautious?
No, I was just saying that, everyone in the chain of command is expected to do his job to the extent that the power and authority has been delegated to him. Everything doesn't reach your desk.
Okay.
Only a few things reach your table, and on which you have to decide. And before deciding, you have your advisors, whether from the... that is why that whole revamping also of the army headquarters, which was done, and a deputy chief strat position was created, so that...
pressures can be taken off.
No, so that the advice which is given to the chief is wholesome.
Okay.
Covering all aspects. But that having been done, finally, and the options are also presented. It's not that you make a plan sitting all by yourself. So the options are also presented, that this is option A, option B, option C, advantages, disadvantages. But finally, what to do is the decision that you have to take.
You see why I say that? Because vis-a-vis Pakistan, we have glorious legacy to talk about. We have won all of them. Whereas China remains negative. What a general at that time in 1962 would have gone, would always be, wasn't it playing in the back of your mind that this is a tricky customer, this is a different theatre altogether?
As I said, we are not 62. We are 2020, 2022. That confidence in our capabilities vis-a-vis the Chinese, we are very much certain that should push come to shove, we will prevail. One more set of fisticuffs leading to one more round of casualties on either side, or as I said, this restrained firing becoming unrestrained. So one thing could have blown up into another and suddenly, but we were able to keep it, the threshold low. But I think that is also because we were better prepared. And they realized that we are better prepared. So they also backed off.
One of the things which happened in that period also is border infrastructure. A lot of people say that as army chief, you were instrumental in boosting military preparedness for the frontier vis-a-vis China, and you managed to get work done in 12 months what people would have coincidentally taken 3 to 4 years.
The plan for infrastructure development for the border areas is always there. It is not that it was a knee-jerk reaction to some incident. So the plans are always there, but as per that schedule which is laid down. And many of them involve taking clearances from various other ministries. They have their own speed at which they work. And at the end of the day, we are a democracy. So we have to follow rules, regulations. We have to,
General साहब का दर्द इसमें दिख रहा है, but he doesn't want to say it.
we have to follow, afforestation plans, environmental studies, all those things. So in a democracy, development takes its own pace. But when an emergency like this took place, then all those things take a backseat. And everybody understands that. It is not that people don't understand or the government doesn't understand. So when these things took a backseat, obviously the same infrastructure development, which would have taken longer, took at a much faster pace.
Did that irk the Chinese? That India was building better infrastructure for faster, speedier deployment?
So pre all these incidents, the fact that our infrastructure development had started for a long time post 62, we were chary of making roads in the border areas. We always felt that let's not annoy the Chinese. That decade of 70s, 80s, and we lost out actually.
That was a thought process in the government, you feel?
Yeah, that time it was that let's keep things low. Why? Thanda rakho, yes. Don't go too far forward. Or there was a feeling that if we make a road and if he is able to capture territory and reach that road head, then he will roll down and make use of that road.
That was a statement. That was this thing that if we sadak bana denge, to China will use it.
So those were the thought processes. Because after when you make a road, then you have to defend it also. And for defending it, you need troops. So it is not a totally out of the world kind of a thought process. It has got some logic behind it. But we were quite reticent in the past of building infrastructure in the border areas. But over the years, that had changed. And we were making more and more roads in the border areas, making better garrisons in the border area. So I think China would have also realized that their window of doing something is rapidly closing.
Okay.
And therefore, do something before that window closes altogether. That might have been one of the reasons for what he did, though difficult to say whether it was actually the reason. But now with whatever has happened and the number of troops which have been stationed and the extra habitat which has come up at a very fast pace, the roads which are being made, so we are now not lagging behind in any manner. Although we will have to grant that his speed of doing things is much more than ours.
Let's move to another moment in your tenure, ceasefire with Pakistan. That came in June 21.
Jan.
Yes, Jan 21. How did that come about? What has that changed?
You see, there was always a ceasefire agreement in place from 2003 onwards. But after the initial years started getting violated and towards the end, by 2020, it was more honored in the breach, as many as 100 violations a day, 2,000 in the month, with a lot of firing by both sides, not restricted to small arms, but even artillery. Every day RT would open up somewhere or the other. So we got some feelers at the ground level. We got some feelers during the DGMO level weekly talks that happened. And of course, the NSA's office was very actively involved in hammering it out altogether. And that is how finally, in the middle of Jan, the DGMOs on either side agreed that we will again start following and have this ceasefire. But within that also we had made it clear that the ceasefire means we'll not fire at the post. But if we feel that there's some infiltration happening on the border, we will fire at that infiltration.
So, Pakistan has Balakot altered the terms of engagement? Do you think?
Balakot is a different ball game altogether, but there is no doubt that the Pakistan is sponsoring the terrorism in J&K. The infiltration which is happening is supported by them. And in earlier days, whenever this large-scale firing would happen on our posts, that was precisely to give those infiltrators that covering fire, so that while our posts are being fired upon, they can sneak across the fence. That is part of the overall plan. But now that that firing doesn't happen, the infiltration also has become more difficult. But it does not mean that they have stopped giving them that last bit of support and rations and or that last push before sending them across. That could still be happening. But that firing part is not happening now. But that support to terror groups, the logistic support, arms, training, that is going on. That has not stopped.
This two-front war thing, how prepared? That's one of the curiosities a lot of people have. Is India prepared with two hostile neighbors?
Once again, I've made this point earlier, that you can have multiple threats, and we have unsettled borders on our west and our north, and the chances of armed hostilities or conflicts with either of them are always there, and we have to be prepared for that.
Either or both?
Yeah. So, two-front threat is different from a two-front war.
Okay.
And to imagine that you will fight two equal or one equal and one perhaps stronger adversary at the same time and prevail is something which has to be taken with a pinch of salt. And therefore, it is, again, wars are not fought by the army. Wars are fought by nations. So, it is a nation which will come to play. And our other, organs, our diplomacy and various other business, those will ensure that one front remains dormant. So that...
That's a beautiful thing you have said.
So one is dormant and you concentrate on the other. And that is what happened in 71. In 71, we signed a pact with Russia. Friendship and something, I'm forgetting the exact name. That was signed in July or August. And that effectively took China out of the equation. And then we were free to handle the primary foe. But to think that, I wouldn't make a very sweeping statement that no country, exceptions are always there to prove the rule. But we study military history on a wider scale, 9 out of 10 times, if somebody has tried to fight a two-front, he has lost.
So it's just bravado.
Yeah, so Germany is the prime example. Without fully settling his western front in England and France, he opened the front with Russia, and obviously he didn't have enough troops to handle both sides. And similar examples abound.
The changing character of war. Ukraine-Russia standout example now. It's changing. It's not that mighty tanks constantly. You've got drones coming in. Very different kind of battlefield now.
Well, they're changing but not changing also.
Really?
So there's a French saying that the more things change, the more they remain the same.
Same. Okay.
So yes, drones have come in, but that boots on ground is still there. That infantryman in the trench is still there. Aircraft are there. The method of employing the tanks has changed. Now further, the artillery has changed. But at the end of the day, that man on the ground, in the trench, in the mud, has not gone away anywhere. That finally has to be done by that infantryman. So when people say that wars will be won by technology alone, technology will aid. It will make a difference on how the forces at your disposal are actually applied. But finally, wars will be measured and victory will be measured in square kilometers lost or gained.
You're saying basically that the nature will remain the same, character may change.
Character.
Which is something you have been saying.
Okay, change, and that character will change, but within that change character, finally it will be that infantryman who will raise the flag on the enemy territory and say that now this is mine. So that will still not change. And I don't say this because I'm an infantryman.
I was restraining myself from saying that.
But that is that is what all the wars have proved.
Yes. But the fact that the Indian defense needs to think, because the Ukraine-Russia war has also proved the limitations of the Russian capabilities and given our dependence on Russian hardware. Has that been changing since you were there?
See, we are dependent on Russian hardware, and because of our extent of our dependence, it's not going to go away overnight.
Is it because they're already too deep in?
Yeah, because all our equipment was Russian for so many years. So, especially our armor, our aircraft, our ships.
Yeah.
In the army, it is more the armor. So, to wean away from that dependence is going to take 20 years. It's not something which is going to happen overnight.
Russians.
From the Russian, because after all, a tank has that life.
You can't throw it away.
So you can't throw it away. You can't say today I will buy.
And it's not an iPhone 14 which you can throw away for 15.
Yeah, for 1,000 tanks from somewhere else, and these 1,000 will. So we will start developing our own, capabilities, and as we develop our own capabilities, the older ones will keep getting phased out, and probably we will not even realize when that whole change has happened. It will happen in such a gradual manner.
How good are we in terms of indigenization? Our own domestic production. Because successful use of the K9 Vajra. That's a good story to tell the viewers.
Yeah, that's a good story that we are doing pretty well. The private industry is a relative new player to this whole defense game. But slowly and steadily they are becoming more and more involved, and their platforms are also becoming more sophisticated. Earlier they were only in that non-kinetic field that you make trucks and things like that. Now they've entered into that main things of guns and arms and ammunition and tanks, and light tank is also being developed in conjunction with civil industry. So obviously it is our capability to make things ourselves is going to increase, but it's going to take time.
Would you advocate, and I argue that if you don't want to comment, that organizations like the DRDO and others should be relieved from the moribund babudom?
Yeah, so that is what the example which I was giving, that DRDO is getting involved in too many peripheral things. Why are they involved in how to grow vegetables in Leh?
Bananas,
Yes, it could be
frozen bananas.
frozen bananas. This it is something that, but which would have given better dividends, developing the engine or these peripheral kind of activities.
What are your concerns vis-a-vis Indian Army today, which you like to be addressed or start getting addressed now?
The priority or the focus or the worry is always modernization. Ideally, you should be 30% state of the art, 30% midlife, and 30% obsolescent.
Okay.
Or 30, or
Not
rather
about.
30, 40, 30. So 70% should be modern and 30% getting phased out. Unfortunately, in our case, it is not so.
How much is it, roughly?
I would say that state of the art, we will be 10, 20%.
Modern?
And modern 30. So 50%, but 50% is
Obsolescence.
on the way out. Our T-72 tanks now. They've been there since 1980s. My whole career has gone seeing T-72s. And they're still in service. Our Cheetah Chetak helicopters, nobody flies Cheetah Chetaks. World over, nobody flies single-engined helicopters. But we are still doing that.
Those passes of Himalayas, when
And
they fly, one
keep giving them, small upgrades, keep trying to extend their life by 2 more years, 1 more year, 6 more months. So we have to be able to reach this 30, 40, 30 target. So that 70% is always new.
There's one question I would like to ask you. This question and comparison keeps happening always. Do you think that, as this government says, some observers say, that there has been definitely a certain degree of expediency as far as decision making is concerned, and also our approach to how we approach our neighbors or hostilities or to any kind of hostilities? Do you agree? Do you sense there has been some change, or is it something which was bound to happen?
No, I think a change has occurred over the last decade or so.
Okay.
But that is also,
Is it leadership?
it is leadership plays a very important factor, no doubt. But it is also our own confidence as a nation and in our capabilities.
How do you sit down and watch TV news when you find opposition saying that इतना 1000 किलोमीटर चीन ने हमारा एरिया ले लिया है, इतना स्क्वायर किलोमीटर?
Yeah, see, most of them are speaking with inadequate knowledge. So I think it's best to forgive them of what they're saying, because we don't want to, sometimes by countering it, you actually disclose more than what is required. Okay. And this is a strategy which is very often followed, that you purposely print something is wrong and then the clarification comes.
It's a trap.
So it's a trap. But that mindset has changed, that we will not take things lying down. And if required, we will come and hit you in your homes, across the border, where you think you're safe. That is that important part
The intent.
of it.
Do you watch what is happening in Bangladesh? And do you have that, what would the chief Awami start thinking right now about Bangladesh post Sheikh Hasina ousted?
Yeah, so Chief,
Would there be sense of worry?
of all the events of 24, I think this change of government in Bangladesh is one of the most worrisome.
Okay.
And we always wanted to have good relations with Bangladesh, because it is a springboard also to our look east and act east policy. Everything goes through that. So government which is anti-India or not so favorably inclined towards India, obviously it is not to our long-term benefit. So these things apart, the anti-India rhetoric which has suddenly come to the surface, the radicalization and the way all these parties are saying that they want to make Bangladesh into an Islamic state.
Yeah.
So all these factors.
So right now we have BSF manning the
borders. So all these factors combined don't augur well for India, because then we'll have to start paying more attention to them.
Distraction.
And it's a distraction. We had a safe Eastern front. Now Eastern front, and the statement by some of their politicians that Bihar, Orissa is also ours.
Yeah.
And it is, Northeast is our Lebensraum.
Yeah.
Those are worrying statements. So, and we should not just discard them as idle.
Agniveer. The charge is कि आपने फौजी का career छोटा कर दिया. You see, the problem here is that what in recent elections which I found in Lok Sabha, कि फौज की नौकरी is not just a नौकरी, it's an employment for people, because it's an employment-starved country. And also honorable employment. It is not, people are now looking at the quality of employment, not just the quantity. It's also got a matter of prestige. It's also got a matter of social upliftment. When a boy joins, it's kind of a moment of social upward mobility when you join the forge. So the criticism is that you have career छोटा कर दिया 4 साल, उसमें से सिर्फ 6 महीने ट्रेनिंग है तो 3.5 साल का.
Once again, it's a question of policy.
Were you for it or you were opposed for it?
Good or bad, time will decide. But let us again go back in history. Till 76, there was no pensionable service. People used to serve only 7 years. That time also army fought, and army fought well. So a policy was changed. So should we say that it worked well till then? Why did you change the policy? If it ain't broke, why fix it? Somebody thought at that point of time that.
What was the criticism then?
So that time we don't know. There was no social media then.
No, because I recall at one time कि एक time पे argument चलता था कि बूढ़े हो रहे हैं, बूढ़े हो जाएंगे.
So I'm sure that at that
you will have an old army.
So I'm sure that at that point of time this criticism would have been there, that you will have an old army.
Okay.
But HR policy was revised. Therefore, after 20 years, if again a policy has been revised, you can't say why you're revising. I mean, revision of HR policies is something which can be done.
4 years later, it is going to be.
Yeah, so, and you will come to know.
Years. Did this Agniveer scheme come from the army drawing board, the services drawing board, or it came from the political stables?
No, initially it was a thought process that we had. Then just as you have a short service commission for officers, where in the year we take, say, 1,000 people as permanent and we take another 200 as short service. And out of that we retain the best.
Okay.
Similarly, we thought that out of the 50,000-60,000 that we enroll every year, why don't we also have a short service enrollment? So that we could take a few, again, if numbers could have been decided later on, take a few as short service who could then, go out and do whatever they want. And
and there's a possibility of them getting absorbed back.
So it was actually a parallel, thought process was exactly parallel to the short service commission.
Then
it
started as a thought process. Then what happened?
And then somewhere along the line, it became that why restrict to only a few people? Let us have more and more.
Were you game with that? Are you happy with this idea? It can be one part of the recruitment policy, but if it becomes the dominant policy.
So let's give it a try. I mean, as I said, why say it is not good or not workable?
We're coming to the end. I want to know that what is the current status of 4 Stars of Destiny, your book, It has been with the publishers for a bit of long time now.
Well, my job was to write the book and give it to the publishers.
Is it a life memoir or?
It is, yes, complete memoirs right till the time I was chief. So the publishers are in the process of getting that permission. So what is the latest status? We'll have to check with them only.
You see, generals of Indian Army and or most of the three services chiefs, I think historically, barring one or two who have caused a bit of a post-retirement tremor, they have been responsible men. So, especially with mild-mannered General Naravane, one doesn't expect that you might have really put something in the book which might really upset the sensitivities in South Block.
Well, I don't think so, but let it be the decision of the MOD finally, and they will convey it in.
It's been 1 year.
So that's why I said the publisher and the MOD are in touch with each other.
आप कभी phone नहीं करते publisher को भाई क्या हुआ?
I am not involved. I enjoyed.
I just written the book and.
Yes, I enjoyed writing it, and.
Is there another one in the books?
There's another one.
Okay.
But that's a murder mystery.
I am amazed. Yes, also please tell. Yeah, this is I would love to know.
So the title is not decided as yet,
Okay.
but I have submitted the manuscript. It
You
is
have written it already.
Yes,
Submitted a
I've
manuscript.
submitted.
So what's the plot like?
So it is a murder mystery set in an army cantonment,
Okay.
in an army background.
Close to something which happened in real life?
No, totally fiction.
Totally fiction.
So there's no question of any permission.
Okay. So you resort to fiction to express yourself.
So I will
Yes.
still become an author.
You will eventually become an author. You hope that this may come out faster than the other one?
No, let's see, we can never say. But this second book is, we're trying for a March or April publication. Yeah.
So viewers, you heard it on Jist News first that General Naravane is going to be coming out with a murder mystery. Yes, the wait for his book is on. But if you want to know broadly what lot of his life as an army chief, as a soldier has been, you can always, as a small glossary, you can go through this long interview I had with General Saab. General Saab, I will like to end with a sense of caution for a nation. You had said, as I said in the beginning, that be prepared for a war if you want to have peace. Can we have one advice to end our show? As the Chief of the Army Staff, who has seen the threats from an angle which nobody in this country has seen. There are just 29, 30 odd men who have seen the threat from that point of view.
If there is one thing I would like to convey is that, and I mentioned it, that it is not armies which fight a war, it's nations which fight a war. And nations means all the citizens also. So we have to be very nationalistic in our outlook. It doesn't mean that you abuse all the others, but we have to have pride in your country. You should not denigrate your own country in public forums or other such places.
Do what you're supposed to do.
Do what you do, and in whatever you're doing, whatever statement you're making, actions you're taking, policy decisions you're taking, whether as a teacher or whether as an industrialist
or a politician,
whether it is affecting 10 people or 1 lakh people, that ultimately is it in the interest and the good of the country.
Thank you very much, General Saab, for
Thank
speaking
you.
to Jist for a very long time. General Saab has his grandchildren waiting for him, and he is going to spend a weekend with them. So we'll not keep him with us anymore. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. It was
Proud to have you with us.
pleasure talking with you, and I hope the viewers also enjoyed the show.